Hey there, Heather, ho there, it's Jeff Cutter Diamond. Welcome you to yet another Cutter Top 10 video, and this one will be released today, being Friday, October the 3rd, the same day as the shot heard around the world, almost the 75th anniversary, just off by 1 year. But regardless of that, we're going to be talking about my beloved Toronto Blue Jays, and hopefully you see on the back. With the good old number 19 of Jose Batista on it. So yeah, this is my gray shirt and all that, my road shirt, if you will, for the Blue Jays. But nevertheless, we're going to be looking at the top 10 Toronto Blue Jays of all time. It's a very fantastic list, and hopefully you'll enjoy it as we take a good look at everything to do with the Toronto Blue Jays. All right, here we go. Number 10 on the list is Tony Fernandez. Sorry, number 10 on the list is Edwin Encarnacion. Edwin was a Blue Jay by luck. The Blue Jays decided to trade away Scott Rowland because he was not working well for the Blue Jays, and the Reds wanted him and traded this guy, unknown guy by the name of Edwin Encarnacion, who was not working out. So, the Blue Jays picked him up, and lo and freaking behold, Edwin put up numbers like you never seen before, and the Reds were like, we traded him for Scott Rowland? Although Scott Rowland was a pretty good player and is in the Hall of Fame, Edwin is not. Edwin Encarnacion's a pretty good player. And the fact of the matter is that, his famous home run in the wild card game of 2016 to sink the Baltimore Orioles and send the Blue Jays to the ALDS against the Rangers, which we beat, is legendary and all that. Known for flying the Parrot and then leaving for Cleveland, all about the money and all that, and the Blue Jays are pissed off they lost him. Number 9 is Tony Fernandez. Pretty good shortstop, and he actually ended up being one of the longest serving Blue Jays. Well, he had 4 stints with the Toronto Blue Jays. Four stints. So Fernandez came up through the farm system by 82, 83, and all that. But Fernandez's chances to get the shortstop were always blocked by Alfredo Griffin. The Blue Jays had confidence in Tony Fernandez. So much so they traded away Griffin to Oakland before the 1985 season, and Fernandez was the main shortstop, and he was one of the best defensive shortstops around, making few errors and actually doing better than Cal Ripken Jr. at times. Fernandez was a pretty good player, and then the Blue Jays got rid of him to San Diego in that big trade that brought back 2 of the top 5 Toronto Blue Jays of all time that I will mention. But nevertheless, Fernandez went to San Diego, then he went to the Mets, and then lo and behold, the Blue Jays got him back in June 1993 because of the injury to Dick Schofield Jr. So because of that, the Blue Jays needed a shortstop, so they got Tony back from the Mets for Darren Jackson. It worked. Fernandez put up 8 RBIs. He put up a 9 RBI World Series. Derek Jeter never did that, and Derek freaking Jr. Mr. November. But anyway, yeah, Fernandez was there, and then left for the Blue Jays, and then came back in 1998 for a little bit, and then came back for 99 to 2001, and he was like ancient, but he was hitting almost 300. I was like, wow, you got to see some great generational fans see Tony Fernandez in action. Number 8 is Jose Batista. Jose Batista, you know, it wasn't because I'm wearing the Batista jersey, but the fact is that Batista's power transformed the Blue Jays in the 2010s. But Batista's story to be a Blue Jay was just as awkward as Edwards was. Batista was down in many organizations, Pittsburgh and Cincy and the Diamondbacks. They didn't want him. Pittsburgh decided to trade Jose Batista to Toronto for a prospect catcher by the name of Robinson Quinels. Do you know who the heck he is? Good, you don't know who he is. Batista came through for the Blue Jays, and somehow, after getting more confidence with his swing, put up a 54 home run game a year in 2010, which broke the Blue Jays record set by someone else you'll see on this list. But Batista was the first Blue Jay to get to 50 home runs, and it was like, holy crap, this guy came out of freaking nowhere, and Pittsburgh must be kicking themselves for getting rid of Batista, kind of like Cincy getting rid of Edwin. Unlike Cincy, Pittsburgh didn't have anything to fall back on, saying, okay, well, Cincy's like, we got Scott Rowland at least. Pittsburgh did not have anything. Anyway, Batista was big. His bat flip in the 2015 playoffs against Texas was legendary. Game 5 of the LDS, which I will confess, I didn't think was going to happen. When Texas won the first two games of the series in Toronto, I was like, we're fucked. Little did I know that the Rangers were going to fuck up at home and the Blue Jays would win Game 5 on home turf. Nevertheless, Batista's home run was big. I remember watching that home run with Bill, my buddy, at the University of Waterloo's assembly hall or whatever. And like the place went nuts after Batista went deep. Batista would hit a few more key home runs against the Royals in the ALCS, but that didn't happen. He was a two-time AL home run champion, which is great. And it was really sad to see him go, more so than Edwin, because Batista kind of had nothing left in the tank after he left Toronto, whereas Edwin had plenty after. Number 7 is Johnny Olerud. Johnny Olerud was a fantastic player and all that. The Blue Jays drafted him in 1989, or was it 88? Well, they drafted him, and then he played great for Washington State. Unfortunately, though, Olerud got a brain aneurysm. Thankfully, his father, who was a doctor, diagnosed him properly, and he ended up being fan-freaking-tastic and all that. Olerud would wear a batting helmet even in the field to try to protect his head and all that because of the aneurysm, and it worked out. He was one of the rare superstars who never went to the minor leagues. Of course, it's biased a little bit, but yeah, Olerud did that. He didn't have to go to the minor leagues. He was the first baseman, and once Fred McGriff was traded away from Toronto to San Diego, Olerud could be the first baseman, and he was. He was a fantastic first baseman, winning the batting title in 1993, actually coming close to Ted Williams' magical mark of 400. He actually was doing that well in August. It was like, wow, Joe Olerud puts it up. And it even was good as Robbie Elmer and Paul Molitor, who was not on this list, Paul Molitor, actually joined him, making the first time in a century that teammates were 1, 2, 3 in the batting order, the batting title. So he was known for a smooth swing, defensive prowess at first, and being a fantastic player and all that. It hurt to see him in a Mets and a Mariners jersey, especially. But yeah, Olerud was special. Number 6 is Dave Stieb, just missing out on the top 5. But yeah, Dave Stieb. Some say was the best pitcher in Blue Jays history. Well, his longevity and all that made him a star. He did pitch one season with the White Sox in 1993, but other than that, he was a Blue Jay. Dave Stieb was found by accident as Al Lamacchia, the scout, was trying to look at someone from Southern Illinois, but not Dave Stieb. As this outfielder came in to pitch, and Stieb was a better pitcher than an outfielder. Stieb wanted to bat and be out in the field more so than pitch, but they convinced him to be a pitcher, and the rest is history. I mean, the dude was 500 in 1979 in the Blue Jays' worst season in history. But yeah, he improved. He got a couple of All-Star starts. He went to the All-Star game many times. He was a 7-time All-Star, and he was a legend. Unfortunately, Dave Stieb wanted to throw a no-hitter. He had an autobiography called Tomorrow I'll Be Perfect, which I read cover to cover for many years. It was like amazing. But Dave Stieb actually won the ERA title in 1985, the best year in Blue Jays history. But the worst part was that, the Blue Jays choked that LCS to the Royals. Anyway, yeah, Stieb did get his no-hitter in 1990 against the Cleveland Indians on Labor Day Sunday in Cleveland at Cleveland Stadium. It was just big, his longevity. Unfortunately, though, a seemingly innocent collision with a base runner in 1991, or was it 92? Well, 92 caused his career to be ruined. Somehow, in some way, even though he left baseball with the White Sox in 93, 5 years later, he was a Blue Jay in 1998. And it was just amazing to see. Number 5 is Robbie Alomar. Some say he's the best ever. I say not because of his off-the-field crapola. But the fact of it is that Robbie Alomar only played 5 seasons with the Blue Jays. Is that fair to make him number 1? I don't think so. But anyway, Robbie Alomar was a good second baseman and a good prospect for the San Diego Padres, joining his brother Sandy Alomar Jr. as San Diego Padres, and they were playing in the Padres organization. You probably forgot that Sandy Alomar Jr. didn't start his career with the Indians, but it started with the Padres. And yes, I know I'm saying Indians because that's what the team was named at the time. So Sandy was actually traded to Cleveland, I think, for Carlos Viagra. I can't remember the trade, but yeah, he was traded, and then Robbie was victimized a few times by maybe racism. I don't know, but anyway, the Blue Jays and the Padres in one of the greatest win-win trades of all time happened. The Blue Jays were always accused of not making moves at the right time. Pat Gillick was always known as being stand pat because his lack of making trades. But Pat Gillick finally decided to do something. 3 days after getting Devo from Devon White from Toronto for Junior Felix. Like he finally made the move. The Blue Jays picked up Robbie Alomar and Joe Carter from the Padres in exchange for Tony Fernandez and Fred McGriff. It's been win because Fernandez was a decent shortstop who came back to the Blue Jays in '93, so it all worked out. And Fred McGriff was a power hitting guy that San Diego leveraged to trade to Atlanta to help them in the 1993 chase in the NL West. Whereas, I'll talk about Joe Carter later, but the fact of the matter is that, you know, it worked out. It was a great win-win trade. Robbie came to the Blue Jays, spent 5 years in Toronto, and had all the Gold Gloves, and he was big. He had some great home runs when they needed to, especially 1992 against Eckersley in Game 4 of the ALCS, and his defense prowess, which actually helped out in the World Series in Game 2, I think, against the Phillies, when he made that play from simply out of nowhere, diving play out of nowhere to take away a hit. Yeah, Alomar spent 5 years. I read his book Second to None, which was fun. The only problem was Alomar the next season in '96 went to Baltimore, and worst of all, on the final weekend of the season in '96, he remember the spitting incident with John Hirschbeck and all that being called on strike three. Guess where it was? It was in Toronto. I even was watching that on CBC and all that, and it happened. Yeah, Robbie Alomar got himself into a lot of problems. He was decent with Baltimore and Cleveland, but of course, his off the field crap means that his number 12 was unretired for the Blue Jays. I think they retired it back. I can't remember. Nevertheless, number 4 is George Bell, the first MVP in Toronto Blue Jays history, not the last, as Josh Donaldson did in 2015. But yeah, George Bell won the '87 AL MVP. Now, I will say this as a Blue Jay fan, George Bell didn't actually deserve it because he struggled in the last few weeks when it counted the most. Because the Blue Jays faltered in that final week of the season, tripping over a 3.5 game lead in the division and losing it to the Tigers. One of the worst choke jobs ever. And of course, you would say about currently with the Tigers, their choke job to lose the division. But the Tigers made the playoffs in this format. Under the 16 format, the Blue Jays definitely would have been in. They probably would have been the 3 seed, if anything. Nevertheless, George Bell was a guy plunked off the Rule 5 draft from the Phillies. A Rule 5 draft is just players you have the experience, but you don't want on the team, so you make a Rule 5. You have to put him on the roster or trade him back to his other team. And George Bell produced. I mean, his defense was not really the best. I mean, he had some good outfield work, but then he started to slumber and all that. He did win the '87 AL MVP, cracking 134 RBIs. But the worst part was in 1988, George Bell actually refused to play designated hitter, even though they said that you're going to be in the lineup, your outfield prowess. It was such that they were going to give Lloyd Moseby from center field to left field and put Sil Capisano in center field. Ugh. Nonetheless, George whined and moaned and groaned. But he did hit 3 home runs on opening day against Brett Saberhagen in the 1988 season, and everyone thought that everything worked out. Bell went back to the left field because of Capisano's crappiness, and Moseby went back to center. He was pretty good for the Blue Jays, but he would always tell his fans to kiss his purple butt. Really? It's purple? Number 3 is Carlos Delgado, the all-time home run leader in Blue Jays history, and a lifelong Blue Jay until he went to the Mets and Marlins. That pissed me off. Carlos Delgado was actually, people forget that he was a catcher's prospect. He played catcher for a while with the Blue Jays in '94, and then he switched to first base and basically put everything on the map. Delgado is one of the greatest ever. I remember watching him hit a home run against the Tampa Bay Rays in 2004, and that was when he got to 1,000 RBIs, which is a rarity in baseball. Really. Nevertheless, Delgado was a powerful presence at first, one of the most fierce sluggers of his era in the 90s. Yeah, he was very underrated. I mean, he was in Toronto, and you know how the American media sometimes thinks about the Blue Jays. Delgado once had a 4 home run game September 2003 against the Tampa Bay Rays, and it was just amazing what Delgado could freaking do with the bat. So yeah, Delgado was my hero growing up as a Blue Jay fan. Number 2 is Doc Holliday, aka Roy Halladay. Roy Halladay was a pretty decent pitcher. The Blue Jays picked him up in '95 first round, and then he finally got on the roster in '98. And in his second career start against the Detroit Tigers on closing day '98, the final day of the regular season, Halladay for some reason was pitching perfectly. Now, at the time, I had the clock radio with the radio, and I was listening to Channel 6's radio stuff about the football game. And then James Brown and Fox interrupted saying that Roy Halladay was throwing a no hitter for the Toronto Blue Jays. I was like, wow. And so in his second career start, he was throwing a no hitter. He was 1 out away from a no hitter when Bobby freaking Higginson ruined it. But nevertheless, Halladay was fine until the next 2 seasons in which he really sucked. He almost quit baseball altogether, but his wife Brandy basically said, "Look into my eyes and tell me you want to quit." And so Halladay didn't quit. He persevered. Mel Queen basically broke him down as a pitcher, but it worked. Halladay was consistent, and by 2003, he was the Cy Young champion, Cy Young Award for Best Pitcher in the American League. He became the ace of the Blue Jays pitching staff and had multiple All-Star selections. It was amazing. His work ethic and dominance worked. And, I was pissed off when Halladay decided to leave the Blue Jays over money and go with the Phillies and all that. Thankfully, though, with the Phillies, Halladay did throw a playoff no-hitter. I think everyone in Toronto wanted him to win a World Series, but yeah, he wasn't going to do it in Toronto. But yeah, Doc Holliday was great. Unfortunately, that plane accident and the subsequent stuff about his mindset and all that taints it, but let's remember the goodness. And number 1, by no question, it's like, who the hell doesn't put him in number 1? It's Joe freaking Carter. Joe Carter's got to be number 1. Greatest Blue Jay moment of all time is because of Joe Carter. Joe Carter was a pretty good outfielder. He was actually a Chicago Cub, got traded to Cleveland in the Rick Sutcliffe deal that actually worked out for the Cubs because Sutcliffe went 15-1 in the National League and was basically 16-1, excuse me, and was basically dominant. Nevertheless, Joe Carter went to Cleveland. That team really sucked in the 80s, but then, Carter ended up being in San Diego. I think that was the Sandy Alomar deal. But yeah, he went to San Diego, and then in '91, as I said, the win-win trade with the Blue Jays, sending him and Robbie Alomar to Toronto for McGriff and Fernandez. It worked out. Carter could play the outfield. He could play first base when he needed to. Carter was okay. In '91, he took a bad tumble into the outfield fence trying to chase down a fly ball in Game 3 of the LCS against the Twins. But other than that, Carter was pretty good. In '92, he was a strong bat in the lineup and all that. And he was playing first base when Nixon tried to bunt his way on, and Tim went through the first, and Joe Carter bounced up and down as the Blue Jays finally won the World Series. Anyhow, in '93, he was a little bit better, and he was a dominant threat. Mitch Williams had lost a lot of sip on his fastball, so he threw his 2-2 slider. Carter ripped it just over the left field wall and into the press boxes. Blue Jays win Game 6 of the '93 World Series 8-5, winning the World Series 8-5? 8-6, sorry. Winning the World Series and giving Toronto back-to-back titles, the first time in 15 years that had happened. And basically, yeah, Joe Carter is always going to be a hero in Toronto circles. Believe it or not. Anyhow, I'm Jeff Diamond.